the hidden secrets of our backyards to the realities of the third world, we take a raw and real look into the challenges and the pursuits of social justice. Welcome to The Point. To sustainably fight poverty, Julie Colombino-Billingham created a social business that provides consistent and dignified jobs. Deux Mains, which means two hands in Creole, is a Haitian-owned and operated business that handcrafts high-quality footwear, handbags, and accessories. 97% of the raw materials in production are either repurposed or sourced locally on the island and manufactured in their solar facility. In a country where 85% of the population does not have access to formal jobs, and only 1% of the population has a university education, Julie designed a model using best practices, combining the nonprofit and for-profit sectors. She incubated a nonprofit arm of the business called Rebuild Globally that provides revolutionary education and paid job training programs for the most vulnerable. Every program graduate is then guaranteed a dignified living wage job at Deux Mains. Under Julie's leadership, the past 10 years have been a dramatic evolution from the earthquake recovery to a sustainable and eco-friendly business that was quickly propelled into the world of ethical fashion. Just to name drop a few of the impressive brands that Deux Mains has been able to work with, you have Kenneth Cole, Eileen Fisher, USAID, the Clinton Foundation, and United Nations. Julie is the newest recipient of the Southern Living Beauty Awards for her work as a female entrepreneur. She was a finalist of the 2017 Digital Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and she is a 2016 Martin Bell Scholar, who's recently received her MBA from the Rollins Crummer Graduate School of Business. She also has an impressive TED Talk called Defeating Poverty that can be found on YouTube. Her book, From Death to Dollars, will be available in 2021. It's based on her real-life encounters post-earthquake and documents the growth of social business ecosystem that she created to instill dignity, financial security, and the ethical fashion business in Haiti. This is one of the first episodes that we will state has a trigger warning. Julie does share some very vulnerable and personal accounts of her experience of the Haiti 2010 earthquake. This may be a trigger for many and bring about episodes of PTSD. So we just want to make sure you know going into it that there is a good amount of this interview that speaks about that. So please go ahead and either pause this or turn it off if that sounds like something that might have a negative effect on you. I have personally known Julie for years and have the pleasure of working with her during my time in Haiti. I am especially excited to introduce her to all of you, and I know that you will be inspired by her story today. So welcome, Julie. We are so excited to have you here. Yeah, so tell me, how did you, I know like you kind of got to Haiti through disaster relief, but how did you even get started in disaster relief to begin with?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I guess when I was young, the American Red Cross used to offer free classes, and I was always kind of a jokester, you know, like when I wanted to get my CPR license, because I just wanted to be helpful if anything ever happened. And I'll never forget, I got kicked out of the CPR class because I made out with a dummy. Apparently, they don't think that that's funny. So, but
I think that's funny.
But I did bond with some of the people in the class, and I just started. I don't even know if they offer anymore. I mean, I'm telling you, girl, this was like 15, 20 years ago, and it was like you'd get these little certificates for doing this. And then I started getting my master's in nonprofit management from the University of Central Florida. And throughout that, a track opened up. It was a new track of disaster relief, and I thrive in chaos. And so I was naturally kind of inclined to that. And so I started taking the classes. And then when disasters would hit, I would deploy through my training through the American Red Cross, and then through this new focus and certificate I had in disaster relief through UCF. And so I responded to Katrina. At first, I deployed to DC, and I worked for the Red Cross in their National Control Center. And 8 months after that disaster, I went and I lived in a FEMA camp for many months. And I would always get promoted by doing something wrong. Like I would do something that they said not to do, but it was always something that in your gut was like, the people need or deserve or desire, because when you're on the ground, you kind of hear those needs different from where policy is being made up here. And so for whatever reason, I got away with serving people in a different way. I don't know why. I mean, they hated me, but they always promoted me. But that was kind of like my trajectory with disaster relief, because I saw how quickly you could make an impact. And I saw how when you would listen to the real survivors, it was very different from what you're being told in the control towers. And so I just kind of had both those experiences. And I knew I wanted to be a part of almost like a catalyst, a bridge between those two worlds. When Haiti hit that night, I think the earthquake hit at like 5:00 at night. I didn't even know that the earthquake had happened. I didn't have a television at the time. I was sitting in my little apartment and I felt a very strong call that night to go to Haiti, which I thought was really bizarre because at the time I was planning a trip to Africa. I'd been to Africa several times. I had worked, I have a lot of different degrees because I love education, but my first degree was in building communities through the arts. So I was a professional dancer and I used to teach creative art therapy in like the women's prison in Miami. And I worked in Africa at a rape clinic just because the creative arts is such a healing thing. And so I was planning this trip to Africa at the time. And then I just feel this like, that feeling, that calling, that urge, whatever it is to go to Haiti. And I'm like, and even though Haiti from South Florida is about 700 miles from where we're sitting right now, it wasn't on my radar.
And you hadn't been there at this point yet?
No, never been there. I had no connection at all with the country. At the time I worked at the United Way. So the Heart of Florida United Way. And I'd been working there for a while. And I'm driving to work and I hear on NPR about this massive earthquake that hit Haiti. Oh, that's God. That's why you put it down my heart. That's just kind of how the disaster took its place and how I ended up in Haiti.
That's crazy. So the earthquake happened January 12th,
2010.
What date did you end up going down? How long after? Because I know Haiti was hard to get into.
Yeah, I got there 10 days after. It was very hard to get into. So because I had some connections from the American Red Cross, it's almost like they put out a bolo of like what's happening. And so I had found out through those old contacts that Vision Airway at the time, Vision Airway, I don't think exists anymore, but they were doing humanitarian flights from Miami to Port-au-Prince. And I also didn't know at this point that the airport runway had totally crumbled and that most people were flying into the DR. I mean, I knew nothing. I was so wildly naive to really what had happened that in retrospect, I would never recommend anybody do this. It was dangerous. It was selfish. It was crazy. But it's what I did. It's what I was called to do. And so I found two guys from a Zion church in Orlando that I'd never met, but it's just, like word of mouth kind of spreads. Yeah. And I was like, I am going to Haiti, like this is happening. I had, it wasn't official through the Red Cross. It wasn't official through anybody. So I drove down to Miami airport either 8 or 9 days later. And I spent either 1 or 2 nights, I can't remember, in Miami airport. But at that time you didn't show our passports. They didn't weigh your bags. It's literally, we were waiting. We were all sleeping, camping out at this Vision Airway thing in Miami. So most of the people on that flight were, as it should have been, it was Miami Medical, so it was doctors. And that's really who should have been going. And a few people like myself doing logistics, but it was almost all medical. And I remember once I got on the plane, it wasn't even totally full. So it wasn't like there was like a lack of, like there wasn't enough seats. I don't really remember why it took so long, but I remember it's about an hour and 30-minute flight, but it took us over 6 hours to land because we had to keep circling and circling. Wow. And the runway was so cracked and crumbled. It was crazy. It was insanity. And so but when we did finally land, this is the part of my experience that I tried to forget a lot of. And it wasn't until, like years later, and talking about things where I remembered that, they opened the doors of the plane and I don't know who they were, either relief workers or Americans who had been there during the disaster, ran onto the plane and they were covered in blood and dust and terrified. And I just thought to myself, there is no way I'm going to make it out here. There's no way. And there's no customs agency. You don't go through. It was not like that. It was crazy. And that was it. But I somehow mustered the strength to get off the plane and there started my new life, at that time, you could still, all the dust was still rising in the air. It still smelled like death. The screaming, I mean, it was all very, very real. I'd never experienced or seen anything like it. That's the part of Haiti, the perseverance, the strength, the sheer faith and determination of the Haitian people that I always hope that people will take from that experience. They couldn't escape it. Haitian people couldn't escape it. The people getting on the plane were foreigners that could leave. And the people who were most affected, there was nowhere to go. And yet they persevered and survived.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think for listeners, even who have been to Haiti, if they remember the old airport and just how different that experience was compared to now. And then for other listeners who haven't been to Haiti, to think about the heart of the earthquake was in Port-au-Prince. But the only quote unquote international airport is also in Port-au-Prince. So you're really flying into the heart of absolute chaos, devastation. And it took, from what I understand, months for even the bodies to be cleaned up and things like that. So you're really landing, and it's not like you're taking a bus or, in a few hours or getting briefed on what's about to happen, because everybody was just running around and trying to figure out what was next. So you're really landing, flying into, a world that's beyond what anybody's really experienced before.
And that's a good point. So many people in middle management and government, nearly 100 UN workers. So, Haiti was already in its own sort of turmoil just from the utter and sheer poverty of the country. But the people who were running or in charge or decision makers, a lot of them lost their lives that day too. So you can imagine not only were communication systems down, but even who to communicate was still established at that time.
That's a great way to think about it. That is, it's physically being disassembled due to the earthquake, but there's also like a systematic disassemble that's happening in politics and systems and communication and technology. There's that whole realm of it. So you landed about 10 days after the earthquake, and then walk us through that. So how long were you there for, and tell us kind of how that led to really where you are now?
Okay, so I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks. I was supposed to be taking my 2-week vacation from the United Way, but I'm sure if anybody was there back then, you could get in, but you couldn't get out. There wasn't any, it was just totally different things. So I went with the two gentlemen that I had met in Orlando to guy's brother's house.
So the men were Haitian American.
One was Haitian, yep. And the other man worked at the Zion Church. They were setting up a clinic. It's so funny because I always used to say in the mountains. And now you'll know this because you know Haiti, but it was Delma 33. At the time, I thought that was the mountains because it took hours to get there because the streets were rubble. It was like you had to, it's not nice driving in Haiti, really at any time, at the best of times. But here, the streets are covered in rubble. People are everywhere. It is kind of hard to describe. It's hard to imagine. So you just kind of had to drive through and not hit anyone, hit anything. It was crazy because it took. So I always thought we were in the mountains, and I didn't even know the demographics of the country. We were working in this clinic, and I'm not medically trained. I had no business working in a clinic. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I was not prepared for that. I was like handing out expired Tylenol to people who needed amputations. Mm-hmm. I was cleaning out wounds with a neti pot, that thing where you would stick up one nostril and it would come down. And I'm literally filtering out wounds. A young boy died of almost like an asthmatic attack. It was the Wild West, and people did not have the help that they needed. So I think it was between that, one, knowing I wasn't supposed to be there, and two, nobody really knew what to expect. So we would work during the daylight hours. And so even though we could have, and I felt should have been working 24 hours, mm-hmm. I had at that time, no idea about self-care, preservation, longevity of my own, 30 years old. And I was in total and utter panic mode.
Yeah. And your adrenaline is just shooting. You're going and going and going. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I didn't think we were working hard enough. Mm-hmm. And I kept expressing that to everybody. I said, we're not working hard enough. We're not doing enough. It's, and I was becoming really angry. And so I said, I'm leaving. Mm. So I hitchhiked from the mountains, Delma 33, not really the mountains. It was a Haitian guy that had a little red RAV4. I didn't speak any Creole at the time. He didn't speak any English. And I got in his car and we went back down to the airport base. And so when I landed in Haiti originally, it was nighttime. Mm. So I didn't really know what anything looked like. I didn't know what was going on. And we drove back down, and that's where I saw there was all kinds of, the VMs were there. The volunteer ministers were the Scientologists who came to Haiti, and they were excellent at disaster relief. I mean, if you know anything, I don't know anything about religion, but I can tell you that the volunteer ministers are awesome at disaster relief. And they had set up a really incredible camp for responders. The hospital that I think then turned into MediShare, and then something else was down there at the time. I mean, everybody was down at the airport because it was kind of like a central zone. So I got back down there and I lived with the VM. I didn't even have a toothbrush. I had nothing. I literally had nothing with me. So they put me up and I started working with them, and I started meeting people there. And slowly, this anger and frustration starts to build because of the complete and utter suffering of people and nothing to help with. I mean, so people were trying to do so much, but there was just nothing you could do. It's really hard to explain because you don't want to shaft all the great work that people were doing and all the kindness that we saw immediately after the earthquake. But the volume of the need and the lack of logistical support to do anything was so piercing. So a couple girls and I, we got so frustrated that we decided we're going to do it our own way. We started confiscating, stealing, whatever the word is you want to use, taking things off the runway that were there and sitting there for days on end. And we made friends with some local Haitian people that had cars, that knew where the need was, and started distributing things we could get our hands on. And over the next few weeks, the word on the street started kind of getting out. So World Food Program asked us to start distributing food to orphanages. And you just kind of start, it's such a incestuous kind of disaster relief. It's this small world of everybody just kind of starts figuring out who's doing what. And that's just how, I think that's how we built everything. It's how from starting there to meeting people to building our charity Rebuild Globally to now our business. It's been this process of trying to be as locally sensitive and as quiet as humanly possible. And I think that was the message, and not that I think, the message I heard, the feeling that I felt most was God was telling me not to talk, but just to listen and to, do what I had done in other disaster scenarios, even as terrible as this one was, and just listen to what people needed and try to absorb what was happening around me. And because I had no cultural context of Haiti, it was even more important to do it then. And that's not in our human nature. We always want to go and act and do and be and save. And you just can't there, and it's not just during times of disaster, it's all the time. You just can't. So you have to fight your own human nature. And I think that having the humility to do that is what has allowed us to stay and grow so much in Haiti after, it's been more than a decade now.
So it sounds like you stayed for longer than your 2-week leave.
Yeah, I did actually. I did. I knew within days that I was going to, and then so I physically couldn't leave. And then I got really, really sick. I got very sick. We had a water shortage in our camp, and we were rationed to 1/4 of a bucket every day for bathing and for cleaning, and drinking water was really hard to find. I remember there was some nights you could get rum or warm beer, but you couldn't find water. And then I got so ill. I remember in my tent, I was sharing a tent with another woman I didn't know, but we each had 2 buckets, one we were sitting on and one we were puking in. It's not a beautiful sight, but simultaneously, this was life.
Many of us have been there. Was it dengue fever, if I remember correctly, or was this something else?
It was probably something simple like worms or some kind of parasite. It wasn't even a big thing. It was nothing I could brag about. It just
wasn't an unidentified illness. Yes. Yeah. We've had many of those. Yes.
Yeah. So from that, and then there was a group of people who I guess it must have been a month or 6 weeks into it, who were sick like this. And they put us on a plane and we went to the DR. And from the DR, I got back to the States. From the States, I formally quit my job at the United Way, and I put my house on the market, sold my house, and went back to Haiti about 6 weeks later. And then I didn't leave.
That's incredible. So from 2 weeks turns into, the last 10 years of your life then?
11.
11 years. So tell us about when you went back to Haiti and what that experience was like, and how it kind of led you from this area that a lot of people who stayed long enough kind of moved from relief to development.
It took me longer to get to the place where we're at the place I want to be right now, where I don't work for our charity anymore. I work for our business, and that's the place where I found the most peace. But it did take 10 years of really understanding contextually what was needed in the community that I was living in. And at the time I had my master's in nonprofit management. I'd always worked for charities. I didn't know how to do this any other way than to set up another charity. And I think they said I like to make up numbers. I'm making up this number, but something like 10,000 charities, came up in the first year of the earthquake. And
Republic of NGOs. Yeah.
Republic of NGOs. Yeah. And so we were just another one. However, I think some kind of crazy, another made up stat is 90% of them no longer exist that, started after the earthquake. Now, not only do we exist, our charity is completely thriving. It was just really this idea of people want a job. So I was like, oh, okay, so yeah, we'll have a job training program. Yeah, cool. So I'm like, yeah. And we'll make sandals. The whole idea came from an experience I had in Africa, making sandals from tires. And so at the time it was this charity idea of okay, yeah, I'll work with some of the women in the community. We'll make sandals and this will be our charity. Mm-hmm. Well, even in context, that's a business, not a charity, but whatever, mm-hmm. Again, very naive at this time.
Well, and 11 years ago, social business wasn't a common phrase that was talked about.
That's true. Do you know the first time someone called me a social entrepreneur, I had to go backstage and Google it. I was literally getting an award and I never even heard it before.
And Google was like, this word does not exist yet.
I was like, social entrepreneur, what is that? And now, yeah, you're right. You're totally right. Thanks for saying that. And now it's more commonplace. But yeah, back in the day, it was back when I was a kid, it was just, a different beast. And then at the time, so I was living then somewhere near the airport. And I remember I was walking to where we were working, which at the time was called Grassroots United. So we rented this little space, this little tiny space. This is probably 5-6 months after the earthquake. And every day when I was walking to work, these kids, street boys were oh, I want to go back to school. Again, didn't really understand the context of street boys, had no idea where these kids were on the street, but they were really cute kids. They wanted to go to school, had no idea they didn't really go to school before, but whatever, so it was a big learning experience. But this kind of idea of oh my gosh, kids are not in school. What the heck's going on? Wait, what? And so that's where we put in this other part. So Rebuild Globally, our charity, became an education and job training organization. And so we started with 10 kids, and I really believed in supporting systems. So we didn't open our own school or build our own school. We paid for the kids to go back to schools in their neighborhoods. And after the first year or so, no one's graduating, no one's what the hell's happening here? So I went into school one day and I realized they're teaching in Creole. The kids are all speaking Creole. We're all, I don't speak French. Everybody's speaking Creole. And then I find out the national exam is in French. I'm like, wait, what the hell's happening? And so all the kids are failing the national exam. Immediately, I hire some Haitian guys to run this program, and this guy, so they implement a French class, because everybody's like, oh, you need to speak English. You need to speak English. No, they don't need to speak English. They need to speak French because they need to pass the national exam so they can pass 5th grade or whatever it is. So we started building our programs based on what we were learning. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these poor kids became our testing ground. However, I can tell you 11 years later, 3 of our very first kids are now managers at Deux Mains in university. The stories are, if I could tell you the life story of each one, it's phenomenal. And I wish that I had been smarter, quicker, but it was definitely, the charity was a process. The same with the job training. So, we're training people to make these sandals. We're thinking, oh yeah, there's got to be a footwear industry. Everybody's going to be able to get a job after this. Come to find out, there's no infrastructure in Haiti. So training people for jobs that don't exist was another kick in the face.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I got kids that we're educating. Yeah. We got women that are now trained, but there's nowhere to put them. Yeah. This is insane. So what do? We build the factory. So we say, okay, if this is truly going to be about holistic development, if this is going to be about a revolution of not just being someone else who comes there and, wants to do something short term, this is about not even just changing their lives, changing my life. What kind of people do we want to be and what kind of legacy do we want to leave? Mm-hmm. And we wanted it, all of us, we all wanted it to be something where our kids could be proud of us. We didn't want to be this place that didn't last 5 years from now, or that was insignificant 5 years from now. So we did. So we said, okay. And then we started realizing, okay, Rebuild Globally and making sandals is not a charity. Mm. Job training and educating kids, that is a charitable endeavor. Those dollars that go through our charity, will never be recapped anywhere. They're going to pour into someone's education and you're never going to get a return on that investment other than an educated and trained society, and which is great in its own right, but like to truly understand the difference between the charity and the for-profit and like where we fit into all this. I mean, we had to really just come to terms with, okay, we have a 501c3 charity. We're going to pour dollars into education and job training. Boom. But if our charity is really going to be the type of organization we can be proud of, it is not going to end at their graduation at either their job training program or their senior, philo graduation.
Yeah.
It cannot end there, not in Haiti, not with the unemployment, not with the lack of infrastructure. We cannot end there.
Mm-hmm.
So along comes our business, Deux Mains. And Deux Mains is an ethical manufacturing company and brand that now is just a few miles away from where our charity lives. And it is the thing that I love most about us. We make footwear and handbags and jewelry. We run a completely solar powered facility, and we have 100% guaranteed job ready for anyone that graduates our programs. And that's how we found to really break the cycle of poverty, how to really not just invest until like, even in the States, I used to work in foster care here, and at 18, we're like, okay, see ya. And it's like, sorry, we're human beings. It doesn't end like that. We don't turn a certain age and that's where it ends. It's like there has to be something in place for all people, especially when the infrastructure doesn't exist where, like how you normally would expect it to. And so that's where we've seen, 100% success in our programming. And with our business, I just thank God, we've been able to develop really great products that over time have evolved through, listening to different customers, listening to, fashion trends. We've had to become a part of this world. I think I was telling you earlier on the call, we lost 80% of our sales during COVID. You would think, oh gosh, how in the world are you still open? It really is, it's a miracle, but it's because we're a business and we've got investors and we have impact investors who are interested in getting their money back. Of course they're investors, but they're also interested in building a business in the toughest parts of the world. This is truly, it's an economic revolution, and it is so much bigger than anything we had ever anticipated. But if this business was going to thrive, we had to figure out what is it that we need to do to ensure the business thrives, not just through the daily, weekly, monthly crises of working in Haiti, but now we've got a global pandemic, really. And it's our team on the ground that's what kept us alive. We have a completely Haitian-run charity now. Sorry, not completely, it's about 85% run. And we still have a communications manager that helps with donor reports, just for language barrier reasons. But the business is pretty much, it's 100% women owned and managed, but because I'm not Haitian, so it's part Haitian, part American ownership. But our team on the ground during COVID, they really quickly changed contracts. We got huge contracts to make masks for the local hospitals and NGOs. We were able to secure our business, move people around so we could operate it at the 6, we were able to really quickly adjust. And that's, how we stayed open, being agile. And Haiti did teach us that, Haiti does teach you how to, and then
Survivor, the reality show, I feel like. Yeah.
That's right. And combine that with the strength and perseverance of the Haitian women and boom, you're set. So now, we have 40 plus staff that work full time at the factory, and I think that people talk a lot about living wages, and sure, I think that's part of it. But our big platform is the consistency in pay. So it's we don't pay by the piece. We don't pay when an order comes in. It is a job with paid maternity, paid paternity leave, paid vacation, health insurance. People will say, oh gosh, I didn't think that they had these types of things in Haiti. Well, they do. They're not, if you're a foreigner, they don't look the same way that they look for you. But if you do your homework and you listen to Haitian people and you let Haitian people run your company, then you'll find the things that you need. And our health insurance has been a saving grace for a couple employees. One who was on a terrible motorcycle accident, but his health insurance definitely saved his life. So many different things have happened. We're just really grateful that there are systems that do exist in the developing world. Hopefully, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about doing this, and hopefully there are more people thinking about starting a business, just to remember that even though the systems don't look the way that you expect them to look, they are there. So you have to follow them. Another big thing, when I went from having a charity to a business, a lot of the people on our charity board were like, why would you want to be a business? You don't pay taxes as a charity. To me, I was like, because I'm doing business activity, and businesses should pay their taxes. So not that listen, I don't know enough about Haitian politics, but all I know is that to be a good citizen, you should pay your taxes. And so we're heavily taxed in Haiti. It's almost like a kind of like a European system. I feel like it's, I feel like we're always being taxed, but that's part of, being a good citizen. And so if you stay, morally in line with your business decisions, I think you'll thrive a little bit better. It's like really hard. It's really hard.
It's so hard, but I think you're right. And you touched on it at the beginning too. There's this difference between what we believe things to be or what we believe things to look like from, our air-conditioned office, in America. And when you get on the ground in Bangladesh or Ecuador or places like Haiti, and you begin to learn the language and you begin to spend time with the people and learn the culture, then you begin to think like, okay, great. Like we had steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, but really we need to have steps X, Y, Z, because this is like what we believed in theory is really not necessarily applicable. Yeah, I mean, my encouragement as well to listeners is like learn from people like Julie, like learn from, the people who are out there and already doing it, because it took all of us, the last 10 years to get to where we are now. And so if we can really bypass a lot of those mistakes and that really difficult learning processes, which ended up hurting a lot of people before it helped a lot of people, like we can all be in such a better position. What is a story that sticks out to you from somebody during the last 11 years that you really think about when you need to remember to keep going?
Oh, gosh. There's so many of them. I would say, can I give you two baby stories?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll do the first one is going to be about Roni. Roni is one of the first kids I met after the earthquake. And he just wanted to go to school and whatever. He went to Revo globally. He's just such a cute kid. I can't even think about him and not smile. And he graduated 2 years ago, went to our job training. He graduated high school, went to our job training program. He's got the university matching program, which is available to all students. And so he started working part-time at Deux Mains, graduated top of his class. I'm sorry, but I'm not bragging, but all of our kids graduate top of their class. Because our tutors are so good. That's
right away, yes.
I'm sorry, they're all just so smart. And so now, him, and there's also a young woman, Lovely, that were kind of went on the same trajectory. And Sarah, who is my business partner in Haiti, lives in Haiti full time. She's lived there for 7 years. She runs the factory from that end with our colleagues. And her biggest confidants are the managers, our management team, and Lovely and Roni, who both work in HR. So they're both in college. Lovely's changed her major. She's become an HR major. She literally runs our HR. And Roni is our quality control manager. I mean, these kids are they're everything. And I always hoped that the factory would be 100% Haitian owned. And it's so funny because I never thought I would take this long, and it's taking way longer than we thought. But when I look at them, I think, oh yeah, they're going to own this place someday. And man, I can't wait for them to own it. It's that's the encouraging thing. Because I think the thing about our business model is we are a Haitian SA, which is like an LLC, but we all own shares. So the management all own shares. I really wanted it to be an employee owned business. It's really important to me. And so I sell my shares to our employees as people become more confident either in their own situation or we add more staff.
Well, I love that.
Oh, thanks. I mean, that was always the reason to do it. And we're on a mission right now. We just got our first investment after 10 years. We have an investment, and the goal is to create 350 jobs, do millions of dollars in sales. That's really the goal. And the beautiful thing is that the factory is in Haiti. So all that money goes back into creating more jobs and creating more infrastructure. That's where we're at right now. We are on that trajectory, and it's a combination of using kids that have gone through our program and young people who have kind of gone through these different life experiences with us. And then the other story I want to tell you is, a lot of people don't talk about the refugee crisis in Haiti that stemmed from the conflict with the Dominican Republic, but there are refugee camps all along the borders, and refugee camps are horrific, inhumane places. And we have been working we have been working in the displacement camp, Bon Bayard, for the last 4 years almost. And we opened a satellite factory in the camp. Through that, we're able to employ people to make our tire soles and do different projects. But even bigger than that, we have 8 full-time employees from the camp. So we bought a bus and we pick them up every day, and they come to work, and they travel 2.5 hours sometimes each way to come to work. This is not for the faint of heart. Being a part of development, people will always want to hear like my story. And usually it's because I speak English, right? That is the position I'm in now. I get to tell the stories. But if you think about my colleague, Julia, who is one of these women, a former refugee who is now a tax-paying citizen in Haiti after the horrific experience she had as a deportee and refugee, is now a tax-paying citizen in the country who travels sometimes 4 hours a day to come to, she's one of the main jewelry makers on the team. That's the inspiration, right? That is what she is sacrificing so that her 3 daughters have a different life. And that's what will happen because of her sacrifices. I didn't know my paternal grandmother because she died when I was so young, but I know the story of her. My father immigrated from Italy. My grandmother couldn't read or write in her own language, and so she never learned English. And she worked at the Comstock canning factory for 25 cents a day. All I know of my grandmother is she used to pick the pits out of cherries on a line in a factory for 25 cents a day. And her youngest son, my father, was the first person in our family to go to college, right? So we have that American dream thing. And now her granddaughter is a part owner in a factory in Haiti. Mm-hmm. And I only hope that my legacy can be, if it's not my own child, I don't have kids right now, but if it's not my own child, it's Julia's children who will then be, the graduates of the best universities because of her mother's sacrifices, because of what we went through together to build that, and so that's kind of, I get to look back, and I always wish I knew more of my grandmother's story. I don't. I just hope that, to me, it feels like it could be something like this,
Absolutely. I love that. And how it's almost like your grandmother, right? It's this global impact that she's had. It's really incredible. So I always love to end by asking the question, what is one thing you would want listeners to take with them today?
I think that we are all born with a purpose, some kind of drive. And I know some people think I'm too optimistic, but I do think it's in there. I think that most people, we have a drive for something. You can do anything. I think, any of us can do anything if we really probably put our ambition to the background and listen more. So I've always just been very passionate about this idea of listening more, because I think we have this idea, if someone doesn't speak the same language, or they have a different accent, or they have a different way of communicating, they might not be as intelligent as us and maybe not worth listening to, or maybe it's our own shame of not knowing another language or something. I've had to take a bite of humble soup repeatedly by learning that lesson over and over, that the intelligence that surrounded me, the experience that surrounded me was far greater than my own. And the only reason you're talking to me today is because I speak English. I can be the common denominator for the listeners. And so I'm so grateful for that opportunity to be a voice for our work. But it was many, not even just all of us that work at Deux Mains or Rebuild right now, but so many people that came into our lives over the last decade that impacted the way we work and how we work. I would just say to the listeners that, anything is possible. We're all living proof of that. Surround yourself with great people and do a lot of listening, and then just put it out there and get it done.
That's so well said. Thank you so much for your time today. It has been an inspiration to me. I had yet to hear your full story, so that was really encouraging. And I appreciate you just sharing some of those very personal and vulnerable memories with us. I hope that our listeners can take some of that and become just as passionate about seeing social change for people both in America and beyond.
Well, thanks for caring about our story and for asking us to come on. It was really fun.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation with Julie. I know I sure did. As always, all relevant links can be found in show notes at lapointefoundation.org. You can find out more information at rebuildglobally.org and deuxmains.com. That's DEUXMAINS.com. They are giving a 15% discount to The Point listeners. Just use code ThePoint15 when you check out at Deux Mains. We would love to hear your feedback. Always feel free to reach out to me at Callie@lapointefoundation.org. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep on fighting for justice.